Hello, my name is Ethan Lane. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association here in our Washington, D.C. office. I'm sorry I can't be with you in Indiana today. Obviously, this has been an unusual year, and as we move into 2021, hopefully that we have some hope to get back to some regular order where we can start meeting again in person. Would love to be able to see some of you personally and look forward to doing that as soon as possible. In the meantime, I want to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on here in Washington. There's been a lot happening over the last month or two following the presidential election, and there's going to be even more happening in the next few weeks as the new 117th Congress starts to get their sea legs underneath them, and the new Biden team begins their transition process into the White House towards the end of this month. First, we're still sorting out the details of the package deal that was passed by Congress right before the Christmas holiday. Obviously, there was a lot of national media coverage about this. There was a lot of confusion about what was in this package as well. There were a couple different pieces, so let me just give you a little bit of what we're looking at there and what this really means. So there were two pieces to this package. The first was the spending bill that we do every year to keep the government running. That's the one that is always the focus of debate on Capitol Hill. It can potentially lead to a government shutdown where there's a lack of funding. And this one in particular was the product of several continuing resolutions through the fall to keep the government operating while they brokered this spending bill. So that was one piece of this package. And the other piece was this $908 billion coronavirus relief package that had a lot of different issues in it that were really dealing with things that hadn't been addressed in previous coronavirus relief packages or had developed as issues over the past few months as we've continued to deal with the coronavirus pandemic around the country. So you have to separate those two. What we'll talk about a little bit more today is the coronavirus relief package. There's a lot of things in that package that were really impactful for cattle producers. One of them that we were really pleased to see was some additional CFAP funds. That's the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. That's the program that led to those payments back in the spring. That was CFAP Part 1 for any producers that marketed cattle between January 15th and April 15th, and CFAP 1 Part 2, which was those inventory payments for the April 15th to May 15th timeframe. And then subsequently to that, we've done a CFAP 2. That was in August and September. Some of you maybe took advantage of that. Well, this package had some additional coronavirus funding, specifically about $1.4 billion for the cattle industry, and that money has been incorrectly called CFAP 3. It's not really what it is. It's really easier to think about that as CFAP 1 Part 3, and what it's intended to do is go back and provide some additional resources to our producers that marketed cattle after April 15th and up to May 15th, but didn't get those larger checks that the first round received for those early sales. This is something we've asked USDA and Capitol Hill to help us address for those stockers and backgrounders and others that really got left out in the cold on those payments earlier this year. This is not going to get them up to that same $200 plus level that some of those participants early on got, but it is going to get them another anywhere from $30 to $65, $67 a head on those animals. And we're hoping that's going to be in conjunction possibly with an additional actual CFAP 3 payment that should sort of round out this program as far as a set of relief for the cattle industry during coronavirus. We were also really pleased to see the Ramp Up Act in an amended form included in this package. That is a bill we've been working on all year to deal with processing capacity. Ramp Up allows for $60 million in grants to state-inspected meat processing facilities that are trying to get up to the federal standards so that they can market their product across state lines. This is something we really had worked hard on. We were expecting to have to lobby on this into the new Congress, so we were really pleased to get a win here and get this included in a year-end deal so that it can get out to the country now and start working on those processing capacity issues that have been so impactful for cattle producer profits over the last year during coronavirus. We're not done on that front. There are several pieces of legislation that we're going to see introduced again in this Congress, hopefully this week, here in the first week in January. Chief among those is the Price Act, which is kind of an omnibus cattle bill is what we're calling it. It has a lot of different pieces of it that'll work on those market conditions, work on those pricing issues, and hopefully restore a little bit of leverage back to cattle producers in that cattle producer to packer relationship. That's where a lot of our focus has been. That's the reason we've spent so much time on some of these price discovery issues. That's something you're going to continue hearing about from NCBA over the coming weeks and months as we have this framework that was put together by our price discovery cattle markets subgroup that triggers report is something you might have heard about. That is up and running now, and we are expecting to see data from that over the next few months, assessing whether or not we have enough negotiated trade at a regional level around the country. That was put together by producers from around the country. This is folks with very different viewpoints on this issue. There were producers in that mix that are NCBA members that have been big proponents of things like 5014, and then there are producers that have been in the mix on that discussion that are opponents of things like 5014 that would like to see more of a voluntary solution. And really that's where NCBA plays a key role here, is bringing all of those stakeholders together to try to find some kind of common ground that makes sense. And we think we've done that with this framework that we will then use to assess whether or not we're getting enough negotiated trade in those various regions around the country. So stay tuned on that. We're going to continue to talk about that. We're also going to have a second component of that that's based on packer participation in various regions around the country to make sure that not only are we getting enough negotiated and cash trade, but that we're getting enough different buyers to truly have some negotiation and competition. This is going to be a really unique Congress because of this close election that we just came out of. The 12-seat net pickup for Republicans in the House of Representatives is not something most people were expecting here in Washington. It leaves a very, very narrow margin of about 4 seats for Democrats in the House of Representatives. And of course, as I film this, we're still waiting for the special election in Georgia to resolve itself in the next few days. That will tell us who's in control of the U.S. Senate moving into the 117th Congress. Either way, there are going to be extremely tight margins on both sides, and that means there's going to be a lot of need to work across the aisle, to forge bipartisan relationships, and to move legislation in a bipartisan way. This is where NCBA really excels, in building those relationships on both sides of the aisle to ensure that when we have a priority we want to move, it's not lopsided on one side or the other, but in fact has support from all different corners of Capitol Hill. We're also starting to have conversations with the incoming Biden administration. Even as we still see some rollout from the presidential campaign, obviously you're all seeing in the news, there's still a lot of protests and court challenges and even now some fights on Capitol Hill about the Electoral College process. The fact is, NCBA and our members need to start engaging with this new team as well, assuming they're going to take office on January 20th, and that's exactly what we've already begun doing. We've had very productive conversations with the Biden transition team across multiple agencies, and we'll continue to have those conversations over the next few weeks as they complete their transition. We are hearing a lot about climate change in this conversation. We think that's going to be a very important piece of the Biden team's agenda as they move into control of Washington. We're ready to have that conversation. We have an extremely good story to tell in the U.S. cattle industry. Our numbers, as you heard me say before, are better than anybody else's in the world. We don't always get credit for that, but we're going to have to spend a lot of time educating over the next few years. We're going to have to make sure that those that don't work in the cattle industry understand just what an incredible job you as producers do, not just to raise the best quality beef in the world, but to do it in the most environmentally sensitive way of anyone in the world. We're ready to meet that challenge. We're ready to have those conversations. And we think that there is going to be an avenue for the new Biden team to be really receptive to those conversations. So you're going to be hearing more from us. We're going to be leaning on you to continue sharing your stories and talk about what you're doing to contribute to that because it's such a great story to tell. We look forward to a really productive 2021, building some of these new relationships, using the NCBA PAC to ensure that we're supporting good candidates on Capitol Hill that have our industries back when it comes time to pass these pieces of legislation, and forging those new relationships at the agencies that are going to be so important to making sure that we're treated fairly and equitably in this new administration. Thank you for all that you do as well. As members of NCBA, as members of the Indiana Cattlemen's Association, we can't do any of this without you. We appreciate everything you do, and we look forward to working with you more in 2021. Thank you and have a great meeting.